So, hi everyone, thank you for joining our webinar about the new upcoming employer accreditation, which is due to come into effect from the 4th of July. My name is Charlotte and I'm one of the licensed advisors at New Zealand Shores, and I'm joined by my colleagues Alan and Fabian, who are both licensed advisors. The aim of today's session is just to have a look at an overview of the new information we've received from Immigration New Zealand over the last few weeks, and that will cover dates, some updates to policy and fees for the accreditation. So first, Fabian, would you like to give us a brief overview of the employer accreditation policy?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Charlotte. Just a little bit of housekeeping first. We'll allow some time at the end for questions and answers. If you can use the Q&A system down below on your Zoom screen, we'll just log those questions and answer them at the end. All right, brilliant. So obviously these are major changes. We're going to be talking about the accreditation system, how that affects work visas, and how that affects New Zealand employers' endeavours to hire offshore. So as Charlotte pointed out, we've had some recent update, but let's go back a step first. We'll have a look at these changes essentially look like. First, a lot of you employers are maybe familiar with the previous accreditation system. This new policy is a radical shift from the previous policy. And that previous policy was actually phased out almost a year ago now. So under previous policy, being accredited was optional, and it actually brought a series of benefits to employer. Under this new policy, this is no longer the case. It's no longer optional. It will become mandatory as of July, and you will have to be accredited under the new scheme before you can support a work visa application. The new system will largely be employer-led as opposed to be migrant-led in the past. And lastly, 6 visa categories will be merged into one. So that will be called the accredited employer work visa. So it will very much be a 3-check system. First, the employer check, second, the job check, and third, the migrant check. So the employer check is essentially an employer must be granted accreditation under the new policy. The job check is a requirement for an employer to have kind of a pre-approval. That's what the job check will be. A job check pre-approved by Immigration New Zealand for any vacancy they want to fill with a non-New Zealand citizen or non-resident worker. And lastly, the migrant check, it's essentially the grant of a work visa to a migrant worker. Let's have a look at what Immigration New Zealand will be looking for in an accredited employer. So you must obviously be a genuine business with a history of trading, registered with IRD. It is expected that you are in a sound financial position. The business must be financially sustainable in order for a visa to be sustainable. That's a key concern for INZ, obviously. Define sustainability. Well, that's, for example, no loss over the last 2 years, or a positive cash flow over the last 6 months, or even if you have a larger group overarching your company that has sufficient capital to inject. These are all things that Immigration New Zealand will consider when they look at sustainability. It's very much a case-to-case basis. So that's where us as advisors come in. Naturally, you must be compliant with all relevant laws and standards. This was a key trigger point for this new policy as employer compliance. These laws and standards include the Companies Act, the Immigration Act, but there obviously are more. So in other words, that essentially implies that you as a business or any of the key staff in the business has no major legal offenses. Once you're granted initial accreditation, you're good for 12 months, but it doesn't stop there. Your accreditation will have to be renewed 1 year after the initial application and every 2 years after that. But it has been said by Immigration New Zealand that some checks will actually be performed throughout the accreditation period. Once to check on compliance, but also to help speed up renewals, which is a good news. So what would these checks typically look like? Well, that can be site visits by Immigration New Zealand officials with the employer's permission, naturally. But we're largely looking at routine documentation requests from RNZ. So making sure you're logging all these new requirements properly. Lastly, the new accreditation policy will also have a strong emphasis on settlement support for migrants. I think, Alan, you meant to cover that.
Yeah, thanks, Fabian. So yeah, there's a few new things I guess immigration are looking for. One of the ones that's popped up is settlement support. So immigration are obviously focusing on what you're doing prior to them. A lot of these are offshore people coming into the country. So settlement support's about what they do prior to their departure, what they do upon arrival, and essentially how you're inducting them and helping them settle into the country within their first month. So within immigration policy, they've listed a few things that must be included within the settlement support. We've got a few of those on the slide here. So such things as accommodation, transportation, some further information about New Zealand, such as cost of living, the healthcare services available. And the good news is for most visas, they're covered with healthcare. If that visa is 24 months or longer, they're covered by the government healthcare system. Then Citizen Advice Bureau, other community groups, depending on what country they're from, there's some really good support that you can steer them towards, and things such as registering with IRD and things like that. So those particular bullet points need to be covered off in a settlement support plan. We do have a template that we can help you with in that space. Other things to note is within the settlement support, there are some online modules to be completed. So within the first month, the employee will need to complete some online modules. It takes about an hour, and they have to do that during work time. Just capture the evidence that they've completed that and save it to be provided later. And the other thing is the immigration will ask for how you've provided those settlement support services. So just some evidence such as email that you have provided it to those migrants.
Great, thanks, Alan. Yeah, that's what I was talking about earlier. It's not so much about implementing those new processes, but it's also thoroughly documenting them so you can provide the evidence on request. Great. So, I mean, that's probably being covered, but let's go back to this just for a few minutes. So there will be two main tiers of accreditation, standard and high volume, and it really comes down to how many migrant workers you anticipate you as a business will need over a 12-month period. So for standard accreditation, the cap is at 5 migrant workers at any one time, and high volume lifts that cap, so from 6 migrants and above. There will also be additional rules and requirements and higher fees for what Immigration New Zealand deems high-risk employers. So these are franchisees and labour hire companies largely. And this is reflected by the implied additional risk for the migrant, as there is for these types of businesses by nature a bit less control over staff, particularly in the case of triangular arrangements with 3 parties involved, such as labour hire. So Immigration New Zealand will essentially expect that labour hire accredited employers are able to actively monitor and document the employment conditions and safety of all their staff they're placing with a third party, primarily, but not only in the health and safety space. But as per the latest policy that's been released, it's largely around health and safety for that. Lastly, for both labour hire and franchisees, Immigration New Zealand will want to see a minimum of 15% of your employees being New Zealand citizens or residents and guaranteed at least 30 hours per week. So unless the employer has no more than 1 employee, as can be the case sometimes. But these are additional requirements that are worth discussing with an advisor, depending on your business requirements. Lastly, for these 2 types of employers, labour hire and franchisees, we can expect more upfront verification and also more ongoing verification for these specific businesses, because again, the risk as deemed by Immigration New Zealand is higher. And these will be treated as high volume. Franchises and labour hire will be treated as high volume in all cases. Next step, the job check. Alan, over to you.
Yeah, so job check is another new step that's been added. Now, this will be open from the 20th of June onwards, and essentially a job check will be an online form to complete and upload some evidence, such as advertising. The cost for that is $610 for a job check. The job check phase is basically by position description, employer, location. So you may hire multiple people for that one job check as long as it fits all that same criteria. Now it's essentially to cover off and make sure that you exhausted your avenues to hire New Zealanders that are sufficiently qualified for that role and skilled for that role. So the advertisement must be up for at least 2-week duration. It's must have certain things listed like the minimum and maximum wage or hourly rates and the guaranteed hours that you can provide, and also the location where that role is based. And the salary levels for the job check are essentially changing to the median wage. So that will be $27.76 per hour from the 20th of June onwards to satisfy that job check. The most important factor though must be market rate. So aligned to other roles of that particular type. And immigration are considering some exceptions to this, such as certain industries and collective agreements, but they haven't released that yet. Immigration actually for policy for the job check phase will be releasing details around this over the coming days. We expect it within the next week or so. So we will distribute more specifics on this job check over the coming days as soon as it's released. And yeah, I think that covers that one, Fabian.
Yeah, very much. Thanks, Alan. So we've covered the employee check, which is accreditation. The job check is largely around showing that no suitable New Zealanders are available for the role that you're trying to fill. And the last one is a migrant check, which essentially is the visa application. So not much change in that space in terms of the process. Existing requirements will remain. Applicants will need to show that they meet immigration's requirement in terms of good character, the usual identity documents, health requirements, and obviously to be deemed competent or skilled enough for the role. Now, one thing that will change though is the type of visa that migrants will be applying for. So historically, there has been 3, 4, up to 6 different visa categories you could apply under, 3 main ones really. And the new accreditation pathway will merge all these into one single visa type. Some of the most common ones that you might know of as the long-term skill shortage work visa, the accredited employer work visa under talent, all that are things of the past for new entrants. The only work visa that's still available today is the essential skills work visa. But even that one is phased out on the 4th of July and will be replaced by the accredited employer work visa. So again, as Alan pointed out, there will be a requirement that the employer is accredited, that a job check has been applied for and approved by immigration, and that the role is minimum median wage or market rate, whichever is the lowest. Again, as Alan pointed out, we know that Immigration New Zealand is working on potential exemptions to the median wage rule, but that is still work in progress in the background, so watch that space. Let's have a brief look at the timeline of changes. All that we're talking about has actually been in the pipe since 2019. It got put on ice for a year or so due to the COVID pandemic, but things got in motion really early last year with the existing accreditation system closing at the end of June. As I just mentioned, some work visa categories closed at the end of 2021. And the next milestone, I suppose, is the new accreditation portal that opens on the 23rd of May. One thing to keep an eye for also is the job check portal that will open at the end of June. And the key date that everyone must remember is the 4th of July, when the accredited employer work visa kicks in and replaces essentially every other work visa. Now, what does that mean in terms of recruitment, hiring offshore or even onshore? Charlotte, can you tell us a bit about this?
Absolutely. So at the moment, we have a border exemption. Well, actually, there's several border exemptions in place. One that probably impacts the majority of people in this webinar is it's called the other skilled workers. So at the moment, for anyone who is earning 1.5 times the median wage, which is 84,240 per annum, can be classed as an other critical worker. There are also a number of other approved classes of workers, and they're a bit different. They have their own process to go through. But the most simple way at the moment is for anyone meeting that 1.5 times the median wage. We go through a process, once you've offered them a role, we go through the process of applying for a border exemption for them. Basically, all we have to submit is an employment agreement and a job description initially, and that's immigration will assess it and say, great, you meet the criteria, and then they invite them to apply for a critical purpose visitor visa. The whole process for the border exemption and the critical purpose visa is probably taking roughly about 3 to 5 weeks all up at the moment. Typically seeing the border exemption about 2, and then the critical purpose visa can vary. I had one approved last week that took a week, but could be anywhere between 1 to 3 weeks roughly. It's virtually, there's no evidence of advertising. You're not having to justify why that person is the best person for the role. So it is a really fast track and streamlined way of getting people into the country prior to July. And you also don't have to hold that accreditation. So if you do have roles that are at that rate or higher, and you're wanting to get people in prior to the 4th of July, this is a really good option to do so. Less documentation on your side, less cost, and the people will ultimately arrive here faster. Get you to pop onto the next slide, Fabian. And then obviously hiring offshore from the 4th of July, we'll be going through that process. You have to be accredited, you have to go through the job check, and then they'll apply for that accredited employer work visa. It's a bit hard to know what that total processing time between the job check and the accredited employer work visa could be. Pre-COVID, we saw work visa applications taking anywhere between sort of 4 to 8 weeks to process, and a lot of that depended on the volume of applications immigration received. So sometimes it would be faster, sometimes it would reach that 8-week mark. So it will, plus add in the job check, it could be a little while before those people are able to arrive onshore, or it could be a lot faster, we don't know. So we're just waiting, I guess, to see until we're in that process, and then we'll be able to give people some more concrete timeframes around that. There is always the important question, if you're hiring staff from offshore, you want to make sure they can stay, that they're not just coming in for a short period of time. So there is several pathways to residence. The moment we do have the Oneoff residency category that was announced end of September 2021. It's as the name suggests, a one-off residence application. It was basically means of immigration clearing a backlog which had been created both pre-COVID and during COVID, as well as kind of rewarding people, I guess, with a fast-tracked pathway to residence who had arrived into New Zealand while the border had been closed. Fairly easy criteria to meet, as long as someone was either in New Zealand on the 29th of September and earning either the minimum wage, had been here for a certain period of time, or was on a scarce list. But it also does apply to people coming into the country on critical purpose visitor visas, either as healthcare workers or other critical workers. So under that border exemption for 1.5 times the median wage, if you come in on that border exemption but are earning over 106,000, these people can actually apply before the 31st of July for that residency visa. If you do have staff who meet the criteria for that, we're definitely recommending they apply. It's faster, there's less documentation, and it's cheaper from an immigration New Zealand point of view. It's about $1,000 cheaper than the skilled migrant category, so it's a really good opportunity for people. We will go back to that skilled migrant category probably from the 1st of August. That is yet to be announced, but that's kind of the indication Immigration New Zealand has given us. Generally, most skilled people meet the thresholds for the skilled migrant category, but it is a points-based system, so people have to, demonstrate different factors like qualifications, work experience, their job, salary, English language ability. And a lot of that makes up those points. So they have to meet that points threshold to be able to apply. At the moment, it's 160 points, but we do feel that there is a review coming for that. What that looks like, we don't know. There's a lot of rumors and theories being bandied about at the moment, but until we have that policy from immigration, your guess is as good as mine, I guess. There will also be a new work to residence category. So some of you may be aware that there has been a work to residence category previously. You kind of need to forget about that old policy because this is completely different, same name, but different type of application, different type of policy. It will basically be for anyone who has held an accredited employer work visa. So that's the one coming into effect from the 4th of July and who has paid at least 200% of the median wage. We haven't seen policy on that yet, so I mean it could change, but that's kind of the understanding we have at the moment. Whether or not that's faster than the skilled migrant category, we don't know. Once again, until we see it, we're not 100% sure. But ultimately, there should be a pathway to residence for just about everyone you hire. Of course, there will be anomalies to that where there are people who don't meet that criteria, but from our standpoint, if we have clients that we're working with, or even if an employer refers someone to us, checking that they're eligible for residence is definitely our first port of call. So everyone knows what the pathway for that particular person looks like.
Great, thanks, Charlotte. Just one thing I thought I would add is under the one-off category, there's no age limit, which could be key to people who started the process before the COVID pandemic and are now over 55 years of age, which is the threshold for the skilled migrant. Then the one-off is pretty much the only option for residents. But there's no age limit for work visas, not under current policy. And we don't anticipate there will be an age limit under the new accredited employer work visa either. It's purely for residents. Great. Oh, and the fees have just been announced, which is great. A really positive thing is that they are lower than anticipated, certainly comparatively lower than previous accreditation policy, except for labour hire companies and franchises, and that's purely reflected by the additional verification work that Immigration New Zealand will undertake. We also have the fee for the new work visa, which is $540, slightly higher than the current essential skills, but not too much. And there will be a fee for any job check that you do, which is $610, again, to Immigration New Zealand. Great. So where to from here? I suppose reach out to us, discuss your specific requirements with one of our advisors. Charlotte, did you want to say a few things and then we can switch over to a Q&A?
Yeah, absolutely. Once again, thank you everyone for joining us. We do have both our phone number you can reach us on. We have, what are we up to, 10 licensed advisors in our office who will be able to chat through the accreditation process for you. Alan and Fabian are, however, I would say our experts in this field. So most of us can give general answers, but for a lot of specialist questions, we would refer you through to Alan and Fabian. You can also email employers@newzealandshorts.com and we will be happy to have a chat with anyone about the specific requirements around their individual staff and when accreditation is likely to be needed for you, plus any other specific queries that may be related to your business in particular, because obviously a lot of the information we've given today is quite general. So please reach out. We're happy to have a chat and we would love to hear from you. Great.
Thanks, Charlotte. Okay, I thought I would start the Q&A with a very good question from Emmy, who's asking whether the new accreditation policy will impact current work visa holders. Well, if you're on a 3-year essential skills visa, for example, that's only just started, it won't need renewing until 2.5 years or at the end of the 3-year term. So you will not have to renew it from July. And your employer will not have to seek accreditation for this from July. An employer only needs accreditation where they need to support a visa application, whether a new visa application or a renewal. Cool. Alan, did you answer that question from Nikki?
Yeah, so another really good question. It says that they predominantly focus on Filipino workers, and they're saying that that if they don't pay above the minimum wage, I believe that would be median wage, so that $27.76, then is it worth getting accredited? So I guess the answer is, if you want to continue to employ temporary work visa holders, then yes, it's a mandatory step to get accredited. So it's no longer an option. It used to be an option, but now it's, if you want to, as Fabian said, either renew a work visa, hire a new migrant, then there's the only way to do that is to be accredited, go through the job check, and thirdly, the visa process will check that you've been through both those first two steps. And then we've got another one, which is, could the main franchisor register as an accredited employer, or do each franchisee need to go through the process? Fabian or Charlotte, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, for that one, each franchisee will have to go through the process, I'm afraid. I recommend that Lindell, who asked the question, reach out to us specifically, and then we can refer to the recently published policy, see how that could work with those specific requirements. But again, if your company is part of a larger group, each company must be accredited in its own right.
Yeah. Okay, I'll pick up the next one. It's to do with settlement support documentation and online modules. So the answer is yes, you'll need to supply your settlement support documents during your application to become accredited. The online modules, however, there's two parts to it. There's the part from the employer to complete, which we will need to submit, that the employer, essentially any managers that are managing migrant workers, will need to complete those online modules. It's about a 1 hour duration to complete. The employees, however, they've got 1 month after they turn up and start working for you to complete those. So you don't need to provide the employee evidence during the employer accreditation application.
I'll pick up the next one. It's about largely around open work rights. So we've got a question from Ebenezer and AJ. They're actually the same idea. Just to clarify, the volume, or I believe the quota, does not include people who already have a work visa through their studies right. No, it doesn't. And it doesn't include people on working holiday visa either, who have work rights by nature, not through a job offer. So anyone who's got part-time work rights from their studies, for example, or someone who has an open work visa through partnership, or an open work visa after completing studies in New Zealand, that does not require accreditation if you want to hire any of these staff, migrant workers. And if you have accreditation, it will not so to speak, eat into your quota, because these people have open work rights. You're not actually offering them a job on the basis of which they'll have to apply for a visa for. So no.
Okay, we've got another great question from Jan. It's is the job check approval attached to a specific candidate or to the job? So the job check phase is attached to essentially a position or position description. And that would mean that if, for example, if you needed 6 workers for a particular job type, that one job check would satisfy the hiring for all 6 offshore workers. The thing to be mindful there is it does state in immigration policy that it is specific to a given location, as well as all those employees would have to fit within the same salary band of minimum and maximum wage levels. But yes, you can have multiple people per job check.
Great. And that job check will be valid for 6 months, I believe. But we're still waiting on policy for the job check. As a matter of fact, we anticipate this webinar to be a bit longer, but in the light of new announcements, probably this week or the next, we will actually do a follow-up event, more focusing on the job check and the new visa type. Just before we close, I thought, Alan, maybe you've had consultations with many employers, so have I. What would you say are the primary concerns when people look at getting accredited again?
Yeah, a lot of it, there's a few different factors. It's whether you've got the documentation readily available and how much effort it is to pull that together. a lot of the approach that we try and take is just pull together what you've got available, and then we'll find sufficient ways to satisfy immigration criteria without having to hire an extra person to document things for you. The other thing is to do with certain confidentiality with the documentation, and you know, it's the same with any business, and same with our business. Is you're releasing a whole bunch of information around how you manage your business, as well as all your internal, you know, all your financials for the past 2 years. So basically the confidence level here with using an advisor, but also with Immigration New Zealand. So a lot of that is all tied up with confidentiality agreements. As licensed advisors, we abide by very strict rules and regulations, and Immigration New Zealand as well. So nothing to be worried about there, but it is something that keeps cropping up.
Great, thanks, Alan. Let's have a look. Oh, good question from Tess. If an existing employee has an essential skills visa due to expire in the next 6 months, will they be able to apply for the new visa if they earn less than the median wage? The answer is no. As a matter of fact, if they have less than 6 months left on their visa, we'd probably recommend they apply for a further essential skills before the new policy kicks in. But again, Tess, I'd recommend you reach out to us so we can have a look at this specifically.
I'll just pick up, we've got a question from Stefan or Stephen, sorry, not sure 100% on your pronunciation there. If you've advertised a role as part of a job check, what would be the situation if we had people apply who weren't up to scratch in New Zealand? Would we have to evidence this? It greatly varies, to be honest. With generally like lower skilled roles, we find immigration takes a bit of a tougher stance on this, and we will quite often see requesting evidence of who's actually applied, and that could be copies of CVs. It may be a list of candidates who have applied through Seek or Trade Me, and then you'd have to write a justification as to why that person or people aren't suitable, and why the person you're wanting to hire from offshore is more suitable. Typically with sort of like more experienced roles, more highly skilled roles, we don't see immigration typically take the same kind of stance. So ultimately it depends on the role. That's been our experience historically, but whether that changes with this new job check process, we don't know. It may be that immigration now asks you to provide everything surrounding that advertising, could be, CVs, etc. So watch this space, I guess.
Thanks, Charlotte. Question from Emmy. Sorry if this has been asked. Do you have indicative costs to support employers with the accreditation application process? It's very much on a case-to-case basis, depending on what the size of your company, what your requirements are. What we do provide free of charge is an accreditation assessment and a follow-up one-on-one consultation, and then we can quote based on your requirements, Emmy. So again, I recommend you reach out to us directly, employers@nzshores.com, and then we'll come back to you as soon as we can. Stefan.
I'll pick up that question from Nikki. Will immigration provide a list of documents that are required? Absolutely. So policy from Immigration New Zealand does quite clearly stipulate what is needed. So if you were to do it yourself, or if you were to use us, you'd need to meet everything that was on that list to demonstrate, whether or not you meet the requirements to be accredited. So they're quite clear on what they want. There isn't really any guessing work around that.
Thanks, Charlotte. I'll pick up Ebenezer. Should the income for work to residence requirement have to be met by base salary alone, or can it be a mix of salary plus commission and bonus? We're still waiting on the policy for the new work visa, but historically it has always been base salary. So we're pretty certain it will be the same for the new work visa. The income that must be met is base salary alone.
Oh, I'll grab the question from Craig. How much detail on the changes are on the Immigration New Zealand website, including templates? The Immigration New Zealand website, whilst it can give a really good overview of certain things required, it's definitely Immigration New Zealand policy where everything is a lot more detailed and listed. We don't typically see Immigration New Zealand providing templates, just because it kind of then allows people to just fill out those templates rather than making sure it's specific information, or genuine information is another issue they sometimes come across. So you're probably not likely to find templates, but in immigration policy, you will definitely find information about the detail on those changes and exactly what's required.
Okay, we'll probably finish that one with that one. Does the job advert for the job check part of the process need to be on a particular platform for the labor market test, or can it be from any website? So the labor market test, historically, you must advertise a role in a way that cannot be considered as either not sufficiently reaching out to New Zealanders or deterring New Zealanders from applying. So in other words, it must be either through a recruiter or a specialized industry platform. Say for farming, for example, FarmSource is acceptable. But other than that, the majority of employers would stick to Seek, Trade Me, or My Job Space, for instance. These have a national reach. They're known by everyone. So if you advertise a position on these, again, historically, these would typically be deemed as sufficient. Just putting a job up on your company website, no matter how big the company, or on your Facebook page is not deemed sufficient evidence of trying to recruit New Zealanders.
Okay, I'll pick up the next one from Jan. Another good question there. What date will the accreditation application be available? So that's going to be launched on the 23rd of May onwards. The job check will be launched from the 20th of June, and then from the 4th of July onwards is when any visa application must come from an accredited employer that has passed the job check. So it's going to be this is well over 30,000 employers that are going to need to be accredited at some point in time. So it's going to be a bit of a crunch on from the 23rd of May as far as a lot of applications going in.
Yep, and one thing I might add actually, because we've been working with tons of employers, accredited or not, and a question we got a lot from employers who are currently accredited or under the old policy is my accreditation going to roll over, or do I need to get the ball rolling for the end of May? Well, the answer is your current accreditation is under the old policy. It will not allow you to apply for an accredited employer work visa or anything like that, nor does it waive the requirement to be accredited under the new policy. You have to get things underway if you want to have your application in by the end of May, same as any other employer. There might be a fee waiver depending when your current accreditation expires, but we'll need to look at that date and confirm with you. So I suppose there's a lot of discussion to be had on a case-to-case basis. So again, we'd like to encourage you to reach out to us and talk about your specific requirements.
Okay, should we wrap it up, Fabian? And yeah, basically, we're always open to phone calls, emails. Just touch base, and then we can discuss any further questions with you directly.
Wonderful. Thanks, Charlotte. Thanks, Alan. Thanks, everyone, for attending.
Thanks for the time. Yes, guys. Bye.